Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, distributing, and monetizing your podcast. And best of all, it's 100% free. And it's 100% ridiculously easy to use. We find it really convenient for Night Moves Radio and our Cloverleaf Radio network. We record when it's best for us, and best of all, we can record on the go or at home. With this easy app, it makes doing our show so much fun and very easy. Anyone wanting to start a podcast? I suggest using Anchor. Perhaps it'd be a great starting point for you.
The night has come. A pale moon shines below, and the stars are twinkling lights. It must be time for Night Moves Radio. We'll be moving to the groovy music, getting lost in the words, and be entranced by timeless art. Good evening, and thank you for tuning in. We're glad that you've come to listen.
Welcome to another episode of Night Moves Radio. On this episode, we have poet and author Kashiana Singh, and she is originally from India and now lives in the Chicago area in Illinois. Thank you for joining us, Kashiana.
Thank you for having me. You're most welcome.
So, I do have some poetry here on our Night Moves Radio. I've spoken with other poets. We speak to a variety of people. We've spoken to authors and musicians and artists, directors, and I'm trying to get more poets. And I know you do some poetry, and you've also done a TED Talk. And I believe you're trying to get a message with some of your work. So if you want to tell our audience about yourself and what is it you do and about it, that would be great.
Absolutely. So, thank you so much for the introduction. That was great. Yes, I am originally from India. I live in Chicago, and that probably feeds into what I do, what I write, and what kind of incorporates my voice. Ariana, so I am a woman. It's a strong voice that comes through. And when I say that, I don't just mean a woman as in the force of a woman voice, but the vulnerability of being a woman, the relationships in my transition from my home country to now my home country, which is the U.S., I have had a long-distance marriage, so there's a relationship aspect that flows through in my writing as well. There's also the tenderness of relationships in terms of parents and elders in the family that comes through. So there's that aspect as well. And then you mentioned the TED Talk, but I like to call myself a work practitioner. I don't know if that's a real word or I invented the word, but my TED Talk was really about work as worship. And so that is another big piece of what comes through in my writing and forms a part of who I am, which is living your daily routines with the sense of bringing meditation and worship to it and finding the signs that you need to. So most of my inspiration happens as I'm just living my daily life, right? I have a full-fledged corporate job. I'm actually in my office right now as I speak with you at this time. I have a full-fledged job, so it's not like I set out time and sit near the lake and go on the mountains and write. I just write in my head on my phone notepad as I'm driving to work, going back from work, thinking about things and just going through my daily routine. So in a sense, I bring my work practitioner self, my woman self, and also my cross-cultural, and the fact that I've traversed many different countries, locations. Even as a child, I haven't lived in one city for more than 3 years. So there's a lot of different locations that flow into my writing as well.
I can imagine. I am kind of curious about one thing, if you don't mind me interrupting. You've probably had to adjust to the culture here in the United States. I guess what I'm wondering, what is the difference of being a woman in India versus being a woman in the United States? I mean, are women, do they hold down, full careers in India, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's that could be a long talk, right? So I'll try and keep. It's a very interesting topic, and also has a lot of different layers to it, Ariana. But at a very simple level, I think there is almost two parallel cultures in India. There's the metropolitan culture, which is the larger cities. That's around 8 or 10 of the large cities, and you will see women holding full-time careers, whether it's a corporate career or it's an entrepreneurship or it's a business, whatever the case may be. But there are also then the smaller subset towns or smaller suburbs where you may not see the same thing happening as much as it may happen in the larger metropolitan areas. So I think that's the beauty of India, is that you get to experience almost 3 or 4 subcultures within one culture.
That's pretty neat. I always kind of wondered about that because, I know I've talked, some people who's come from India to the United States, and I always wondered how much of a culture shock that was. So.
Yeah. That's a great question, and it almost deserves its own topic for another show.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine, and I would probably be very interested in hearing about it.
Yeah.
But, I had to ask. I do, and something else I notice about the difference between India and the United States, I do know some poets, and, they do kind of talk about poetry, or maybe I'm just living in the wrong area, but to me, I feel like, and if you can tell me I'm wrong, it's okay, but I feel like India, poetry is really important and more popular over in the India part of the country than it is here in the United States, because I've met more people from India who are poets online than I have from the United States.
Oh, yeah, you hit a great point. That is true. And I'll spend probably 2 minutes in it. Again, like I've said, cultures and subcultures and generational differences. So the one important thing to know about India, which you probably know, but important to note as it feeds into our discussion, Ariana, is the fact that it's got a very large young youth population, right, because of the population size. So it's one of the countries that the population is a disadvantage, but then the advantage is a large portion of the population is young and in their 20s and early 30s, right? So they're driving a lot of the change in the country. So that links to your point. So a lot of the online presence, like you said, is driven by this young group of poets. And I was in India actually just around 3 months ago, and I got invited to one of the poetry readings that they had. And I can tell you, I was an outlier in terms of my age. Everybody there were around 6 other poets there, and everybody was in the age group of probably 25 to 35 years.
Oh my gosh, wow.
So there is a lot, you are 100% right, there is a lot of cultural shift in terms of poetry becoming the language of the youth. You are seeing that online. But keep that to the side for a second. It is important to understand that most ancient scriptures, right, not just India, but even if you look at the scriptures across the world, most ancient scriptures, including the Bible, are written in poetry.
Oh, for sure, right? Psalms.
And India is a country of a lot of ancient scriptures. And so as we are getting the youth engaged in poetry, one of the things which is advantageous is they are also engaging in rediscovering the ancient scriptures and understanding that literature one more time. So it's almost like a blending of the new with the classical happening at this point in time, like a melting pot.
That's
within
really
the Indian
awesome.
culture.
That's great. I wish we had, I feel like right now United States is more of the baby boomers and a lot of the people who grew up during Vietnam and a lot of that. And there's still more of them than there are of the young folks. So, and I like how the younger people in your country are kind of moving things forward, but yet you still have your older culture. So then it really makes a nice blend. And I kind of wish we had something like that here.
Yes, that's a great pleasure. I mean, I can tell you, I read a lot of the younger Indian poets. I'm also a big fan of course, I'll be amiss if I don't mention our very own Joy Harjo and how much she is inspiring, and our old folks like Mary Oliver and others. But I like the advantage I get, therefore, is I get exposed to a lot of
Wow.
Indian writing, which is really fresh as well.
Oh, that's just wonderful. That's awesome. So, so what exactly is it, that you do? I know you said you kind of use worship, you work as worship, and like a work practitioner. You want to kind of describe, like, what it is that you do, with all of that?
Yeah, I can take a couple of few minutes to do that. And so I work in a typical corporate job. I'm actually a director of outsourcing in a large benefits administration company, and have been in this job for close to 13, 14 years now, Ariana, and I have been in the corporate world now for close to 25 years. But when I say work practitioner, what I mean by that is as I've worked through different organizations across the countries, across different locations, there is very often a sense and a common dialogue that occurs about there is work and then there is the outside, right? So I will do what I need to do at work, and then I will go find myself.
Yeah.
I'll go connect with myself.
I totally
I'll find
understand.
what I need to do outside.
That's kind of how I am.
Yeah, right. So and my take is, and people have often this is how I went and crystallized my own thought process, because people always ask me the question about, you work in a typical heavy hours corporate job. Two, you write poetry, right? The two don't seem to go together. And B, how do you find the ability to be stress-free and to engage in things that are not necessarily your direct job responsibilities? And in thinking and reflecting to myself, I think that comes from simple things like, if I am teaching a training class in a classroom at work, what I draw from it is that I'm connecting with the youth that would be the age of my brother, who I lost to a tragedy a couple of years ago. So my connection at that point, when I'm teaching that audience as a corporate job, is I am teaching people who are the same age as what my brother might have been.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Yeah.
If I'm writing an email to a client, in my head I'm translating that to say, this is another place for you, Kashiana, to practice your writing capabilities. How can you make this better?
Most definitely, yeah.
How can you make this more effective? Which word can you use to make sure the message is delivered more effectively? So in simple words, that's what I mean by a work practitioner, is you don't have to go outside to find that yourself, that stability, that worship. You can find it in your day-to-day work, whatever it is that you may be doing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Those are good things to do. That you can kind of look at work a whole different way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. So, Kashiana, how long have you been writing?
Oh my God, that's a great question. But it's also, I think it's hard. I've been writing forever, Ariana, I would say. Like, I think my first real, what I would call as what turned out to be a poem, was probably when I was 11 years old. And I wrote something, I don't even remember for what right now, but I know very well that there was a little celebration at the dining table with my family, because my dad was a lover of writing, and he said, wow, like that truly is a good poem and you should write
That's so
more.
awesome.
And from there on there was no stopping. I have been always writing. I became more present online with my blog around 5 years ago. When I moved to the United States, like I said, my husband was still in India for almost 3-4 years. That probably gave me both the motivation as well as the time to be able to write. So I did a lot of online at that point in time, and it has just continued from there. And I try to write every day.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yes.
I think it's hard for writers to not write something every day.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
And I'm so glad that you had your family support and that your dad was a writer. I mean, my family supports me, but I started writing at a young age myself. And I used to do stories, but when I switched to poetry, if I would share it with someone in my family, the first question they'd usually ask me is, well, what does that mean? Or what are you trying to say?
Right.
And I was like, ugh.
Oh my God.
You know?
I can imagine, right?
Yeah.